When I first moved into the quiet cul-de-sac at the edge of town, I thought I'd finally found the perfect escape from years of apartment living. My property backed onto a stretch of wooded land. My yard was spacious and private, and the old cedar fence along the back was sturdy enough to keep the peace between me and whoever lived behind me. But little did I know that my next-door neighbor, Karen, would see that fence not as a boundary, but as an obstacle she was entitled to remove. The first time I noticed anything suspicious was on a Saturday morning when I went out back to rake leaves and found one of the cedar panels leaning against the shed, not broken, just lifted off its posts and set aside as though someone had decided the fence was optional. And before I could even process what I was seeing, Karen herself appeared, striding across my yard like she owned the place, wearing a neon jogging suit and carrying a reusable coffee cup. And when I asked what she was doing, she gave me this condescending little smile and said, "Oh, I just moved that out of the way so I could get through. My dog likes walking. The trail on your side, and it's way easier to cut through here than go around the block." I was too stunned to even respond at first, so I just told her the obvious, that she couldn't be on my property without permission. And her reaction told me everything I needed to know about the type of person I was dealing with, because instead of apologizing, she rolled her eyes and said, "Oh, don't be one of those neighbors, it's just a shortcut," as if that was some sort of legal defense. I put the panel back in place, secured it with screws, and figured that would be the end of it, but by the following week, not only had she removed it again, but she'd clearly started using the gap daily. I could see the worn patch of grass where her feet had trampled the lawn, and even her dog's muddy paw prints leading across my yard. I confronted her a second time, this time making it very clear that she was trespassing, but she doubled down, insisting that the previous owner didn't mind and that she had a right to access the trail the shortest way possible. That night I checked the property plat from my closing documents just to make sure I wasn't losing my mind, and of course it confirmed what I already knew, that the fence was fully within my boundary and she had absolutely zero right to be on my land. So I replaced the screws with heavy-duty bolts, thinking I was done playing games, but 2 days later, I came home to find half the fence smashed, not removed. Smashed, the cedar boards cracked and splintered like someone had taken a sledgehammer to them, and the muddy footprints leading away from the wreckage made it clear who the culprit was. When I confronted her yet again, she didn't even deny it. She just shrugged and said, "Well, if you'd just let me through, this wouldn't have happened," as if destroying my property was somehow my fault. That was the moment I decided I wasn't just going to repair the fence, I was going to end this nonsense once and for all, and not by asking nicely. I started researching property lines, easements, and, most importantly, the narrow strip of unused land that separated my backyard from the public trail, which I'd always assumed belonged to the city. But after a little digging at the county recorder's office, I discovered it was actually owned by a private trust that had been sitting on it for decades without doing anything. A few phone calls, and some paperwork later, I had a purchase agreement in hand for that strip of land, meaning I now owned not just my yard, but the only access point Karen had for her shortcut. When the deed finally recorded, I wasted no time. I put up a brand new steel fence, taller and far sturdier than the old cedar one, complete with a locking gate that only I had the key for, and for good measure I installed security cameras that covered every angle. The next morning, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee and waited, and sure enough, Karen came striding out with her dog, expecting to waltz through my yard like always. The look on her face when she saw the new fence was pure gold, her jaw literally dropping before she stormed up to it and started rattling the lock like that would magically open it. When she saw me watching, she shouted across the yard, "You can't do this!" To which I simply held up the deed and said, "Actually, I own this now." She tried threatening me with calling the HOA, which didn't even exist in our neighborhood, and getting the city involved, but every call she made ended the same way, with someone explaining that she had no legal right to cross my land. By the end of that week, she'd resorted to pacing along the fence, muttering to herself, clearly trying to figure out some new angle to get her way. But for the first time since moving in, I felt like I had the upper hand, and I knew this was Just the beginning of a battle she couldn't win, because I wasn't just defending my property anymore. I was defending the principle that you don't get to bulldoze other people's boundaries just because it's convenient for you. Owning that strip of land changed the entire dynamic between us, but it also triggered what I can only describe as Karen's full-blown campaign of retaliation, because within days of the new fence going up, the subtle nuisances began. At first it was small things like finding my trash can mysteriously tipped over on pickup day, or discovering clumps of dog hair near my gate as if she had been letting her mutt, accidentally, relieve itself right against the fence. But then it escalated to more deliberate acts, like the morning I found a giant smear of peanut butter spread across one of my security camera lenses, a cheap attempt to blind it long enough for her to do something. I cleaned it off, reviewed the footage, and sure enough, there she was, grinning at the camera before stepping out of frame with her dog like she thought she was starring in some neighborhood sitcom. It wasn't just irritating, it was calculated, the kind of petty harassment designed to make you snap, and honestly, I might have ignored it if it had stopped there, but then she made her first real attempt to break through the steel fence. It happened late one night when I was still awake working in my home office, and I heard this faint metallic clanging from the backyard. So I killed the lights, opened the blinds just enough to see, and there she was, wearing a hoodie and using what looked like a pry bar, trying to pop the gate hinges. I hit the floodlights and she froze like a deer in headlights before bolting back toward her yard, muttering something about needing to get through for an emergency, which was hilarious considering she was dressed for a burglary. The next morning, I printed stills from the security footage and left them in her mailbox with a polite note reminding her that she was trespassing on private property and that further attempts to damage my fence would be reported to the police. I didn't actually expect the note to change her behavior, but I wanted it on record that I'd warned her, sure enough. The following week I caught her trying a new tactic. She'd roped in a couple of her friends, middle-aged women just like her, to act as her walking buddies, and the three of them showed up in my yard midday, knocking on the gate and demanding I open up so they could access the public trail. I stepped outside, calmly explained again that they were on private property, and when Karen started in with her, "You can't block public access" speech, I shut it down by handing them copies of the deed and survey showing that not only was it not public access, it was mine in black and white. They left in a huff, muttering about selfish neighbors, but I could tell Karen was seething, because the very next night someone, and I'm not naming names, but let's be honest, it was her, threw a full bag of garbage over the fence into my yard, scattering fast food wrappers, coffee cups, and even a couple of broken ceramic mugs across my lawn. That's when I decided it was time to stop playing defense and start stacking the deck in my favor, so I filed a formal trespassing complaint with the local police, attaching all my security footage and the incident log I'd been keeping since the first fence panel went missing. The officer who came out was actually amused at how much evidence I had, telling me most people show up with nothing but, he said. She said, while I had timestamps, photos, videos, and even property maps, within a week, Karen received an official warning, which she promptly crumpled up and tossed on my driveway in a childish display of defiance. Fine, if that's how she wanted to play it, I could escalate too. I contacted a surveyor to have the property lines restaked with bright orange markers, not because I needed to, I already knew exactly where the lines were, but because it would drive her nuts to see her shortcut so blatantly, permanently, marked as off-limits. Sure enough, the day the surveyor came out, she came storming out of her back door yelling about how I was ruining the neighborhood vibe and acting like I own everything. To which the surveyor, bless his soul, simply pointed at the plat and said, "Well, actually, he does own this." I thought that would be the peak of her tantrums, but then she tried the most ridiculous stunt yet. She called the city claiming that my fence was a code violation because it was blocking wildlife migration, which is laughable considering. The local wildlife consists mostly of squirrels and the occasional raccoon, neither of which have any trouble scaling a fence. The city inspector came out, took one look, and told her, in front of me, that not only was the fence perfectly legal, it was actually beneficial for controlling access to the trail. The smug look I gave her after that interaction could have curdled milk, but in truth I knew she wasn't going to stop, because people like Karen don't quit until they either get their way or hit a wall they physically can't climb, and I was determined to be that wall. So I started thinking about more permanent solutions, ones that didn't just keep her out physically, but also left her without any room to maneuver legally, and that's when I stumbled across the little-known fact that in our county, if you enclose your property completely and install certain types of security measures, you can classify it as a controlled access lot, which changes the penalties for trespassing from a slap on the wrist to something with real teeth. That idea lit a fire under me because it meant I could make her nonsense not just annoying for her, but expensive and legally risky, and I had every intention of following through. Once I learned about the controlled access designation, I dove headfirst into researching every step required to qualify, poring over county ordinances, zoning regulations, and even obscure property management guidelines that most homeowners never bother to read. And what I found was pure gold. To get the classification, I needed to fully enclose the property with an unbroken barrier, install either monitored security cameras or motion-activated alarms at all entry points, and register. The setup with the sheriff's department as a private access lot? Easy enough for me, since I already had half the infrastructure in place. The fence was solid, the cameras were rolling, and the only gaps were the front gate and a small service opening in the back where the old shortcut used to be. So, I ordered a reinforced steel security gate for the front and had a contractor weld the rear service entrance shut. It took about 2 weeks to get everything finished, during which time Karen's harassment went into overdrive. As if she could sense I was tightening the noose, she started pacing along the fence line daily, phone in hand, muttering loudly into it about reporting illegal barriers. And one afternoon she actually dragged her garbage bin all the way to the property corner and tipped it over, spilling trash just inches from my lawn like she was daring me to say something. I didn't rise to the bait, because I was too busy setting up the motion-activated floodlights and linking the camera system directly to a cloud backup, so even if someone tried to smash them, the footage would be safe. When the final inspection day came, the county rep and a deputy arrived together, walked the perimeter with clipboards, checked my security logs, and within an hour I had the official certification. A single laminated sign on the gate now warned that entry without permission was a criminal trespass carrying fines and potential jail time, and I made sure that sign was big enough for Karen to read from her kitchen window. Her reaction was priceless. She marched over, slapped the gate with her palm, and yelled, "You can't trap me in my own neighborhood." To which the deputy, who happened to still be there finishing paperwork, calmly told her, "Ma'am, this is not your property, and you've been warned before." If looks could kill, I'd have been buried on the spot, but instead she stomped off, slamming her door hard enough to rattle her own porch. I thought maybe, just maybe, the legal upgrade would be enough to make her back down, but less. Then 48 hours later, my cameras caught her trying something new. She had recruited her nephew, a wiry 20-something in a backward baseball cap, to accidentally drop his bike on my side of the fence while she distracted me at the front gate by pretending to ask about negotiating an access deal. While I was answering her nonsense, he was crouched at the back with a small hacksaw, trying to cut through the lower hinge bolts. Luckily, the motion sensors picked him up, the alarm went off, and I got the pleasure of watching him trip over his own bike while scrambling back through the bush. That little stunt earned Karen her first official citation for criminal trespass and accessory, and I heard through the grapevine that her nephew wasn't too thrilled about having to explain it to his probation officer. Oh yes, turns out, he wasn't exactly new to the legal system. From that point on, Karen's war became a cycle of petty vandalism, legal pushback, and her discovering, over and over again, that I was always one step ahead. She tried filing a nuisance claim with the HOA, except, surprise, my property wasn't part of the HOA and never had been, which meant they had zero jurisdiction. She tried complaining to animal control about my dangerous German shepherd, but the officer who came out ended up petting him in my driveway and telling me she was a beautiful, well-trained dog. She even tried rallying other neighbors to boycott me socially, except most of them had already been on the receiving end of her antics and were quietly cheering me on. The real turning point, though, came when I discovered an opportunity to not just defend my property, but actually turn the tables in a way that would make it nearly impossible for her to pull any more stunts. A nearby vacant lot, one that bordered her yard on the opposite side from mine, came up for sale due to a tax lien, and I realized that if I bought it, I could essentially box her in completely, controlling every inch of land she'd ever used as a shortcut in any direction. The price was shockingly low for the location, so I contacted the county, paid the back taxes, and within a month it was mine. Now, with both the strip along her rear and the lot beside her under my ownership, Karen's property was effectively a little island surrounded by land she had no legal right to touch. I wasted no time marking the new boundaries with more bright stakes, adding signage, and tying both parcels into my security system so any attempt to breach them would set off alarms. The look on her face the first time she realized she couldn't even cut through the lot on the other side was the closest thing I've ever seen to someone physically deflating. Her shoulders slumped, her jaw worked like she wanted to scream, but couldn't find the words, and then she spun on her heel and stomped inside without so much as a fake smile. I knew right then that the game had shifted from her trying to win to her simply trying to save face, but I also knew she wasn't done, because people like Karen never stop until they're either humiliated beyond recovery or legally forced to quit, and I had every intention of delivering both. Owning the second parcel put me in a position of absolute leverage, but I knew that if I didn't lock things down legally, Karen would spend the next year filing every frivolous complaint she could think of just to make my life miserable, so I decided to escalate in a way she wouldn't expect by turning the newly acquired side lot into a legally recognized private conservation easement, something that not only gave me exclusive control over access but also came with environmental protections that made it a nightmare for anyone to challenge. I hired a local surveyor to draft the maps, brought in an environmental consultant to document the native plant growth and bird species, and filed all the paperwork with the County Environmental Services Department, making the lot officially protected green space under my name, which meant that any damage to it, including foot traffic that disturbed the habitat, carried heavy fines and even the possibility of criminal charges. This was the moment I realized I had completely boxed Karen in both physically and legally, and when I say boxed in, I mean literally. Her home now had only one legal pedestrian exit, the front sidewalk that ran toward the main street, and she absolutely hated it because it meant she couldn't just stroll through the backyards or side lots to shave minutes off her trips to the park or the corner store. At first, she tried to act like it didn't bother her, pretending she was just enjoying the scenic route, but within weeks my cameras caught her pacing along the fence again, scowling, phone pressed to her ear as she likely vented to some poor HOA board member who had no jurisdiction to help her. I thought maybe she'd settle into the new reality, but Karen being Karen, she instead launched what I can only describe as her Operation Fence Break, a series of increasingly ridiculous attempts to breach my property lines. She started small, tossing sticks over the fence into my yard, clearly hoping my dog would drag them back out through the gate and leave it open. He didn't, he just chewed them to pieces. When that failed, she tried to enlist delivery drivers as her pawns, flagging down a FedEx guy one afternoon and insisting he could cut through the lot to save time, which backfired spectacularly when he told her he couldn't trespass, and that the property owner, me, had made it very clear about boundaries. The funniest attempt came late one night when she showed up in head-to-toe black clothing, like she thought she was some kind of cat burglar, and tried to scale the side fence using a step stool, only to discover that I had capped the top with a rounded, non-climb surface and that the cameras were equipped with floodlights and audio warnings. The moment the light hit her and the system blared, "You are trespassing, leave immediately," she screamed like she'd been shot, tumbled backward into her own flower bed, and ran inside. I probably could have called the sheriff right then, but I decided to let her stew in the humiliation a bit longer, because I had a much bigger move in the works. See, the conservation easement status gave me access to certain county grants for maintaining and improving the protected land, and one of the approved uses for those grants was installing fencing and gates for security and habitat preservation, so I applied for the funds, got them, and used them to build an 8-foot privacy fence along both parcels, effectively creating a walled perimeter around Karen's home that she had zero authority to touch. The day the last panel went up, she came storming out with her phone filming, screaming about being imprisoned and threatening to sue for illegal confinement, only for the sheriff's deputy, who happened to be there inspecting the work, to calmly inform her that property boundaries are not confinement, and that she was welcome to walk out the front door like any normal human being. I swear I saw her eyes glass over with the realization that she'd lost every shortcut and every sneaky maneuver she'd ever relied on, but true to form, instead of accepting defeat, she doubled down. The next week she filed a formal complaint, with the county claiming that my fence blocked emergency access to her home, but the fire marshal came out, inspected, and flatly told her that the front street access was more than adequate and that she'd wasted everyone's time. Humiliated again, she tried the media angle, contacting a local consumer rights reporter, but when they reached out to me for comment and I showed them the footage of her vandalizing the original fence and attempting to cut through the lot, they suddenly dropped the story. Each failed attempt seemed to eat away at her, and I could see it in her posture, her face, the way she now avoided eye contact when she drove by. But I wasn't naive. I knew the most dangerous point in any fight with someone like Karen is when they start to realize they've lost, because that's when they get desperate. My suspicion proved right one windy night about a month later, when my alarm went off at 2 a.m. and the live feed showed her creeping along the side fence with what looked like a pair of bolt cutters. She wasn't even trying to hide anymore. I called the sheriff immediately, and within 10 minutes 2 patrol cars pulled up, lights flashing, catching her red-handed trying to snip the chain on the side gate. She was arrested on the spot for criminal mischief and trespassing, and though she made bail the next morning, the arrest was enough to trigger a court-ordered no-contact order, meaning she couldn't set foot on my property for any reason. This, at long last, was the turning point I'd been waiting for. She was boxed in, legally restrained and publicly humiliated, but as satisfying as that was, I knew the real revenge was still to come, because I had one final plan that would not only keep her in check permanently, but also make sure she'd never forget the price of messing with me. With the no-contact order in place, Karen's ability to cause me direct headaches was severely limited, but I wasn't about to stop there. I'd learned the hard way that people like her don't just give up. They look for loopholes, and if I left even one tiny crack open, she'd try to pry it wide. So I decided to close this chapter with a move that would not only cement my control of the boundary forever, but also turn the whole situation into something profitable for me and a constant reminder to her of just how badly she'd misplayed her hand. First, I approached the county about expanding my conservation easement into a designated private nature corridor, complete with gated access, native plant restoration, and wildlife cameras for educational purposes. It was the kind of project that made local officials drool because it looked great on environmental reports. So they fast-tracked my permits and even offered additional funding. This gave me legal grounds to not only keep my fences, but also install locked steel gates with coded entry, so even if Karen somehow found a way to skirt the no-contact order in the future, she'd still be staring at a barrier she couldn't breach. Next, I reached out to a local hiking and birdwatching group with an idea. I'd allow small, guided tours through my green space for a modest fee, proceeds going partly to the group and partly into my pocket. The idea took off almost immediately, and within a month I had weekend walking tours booked out weeks in advance, people strolling past the very spot where Karen used to stomp through my fence as though she owned it. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd destroyed my fence for a shortcut, and now strangers were paying me for the privilege of walking where she once trespassed. She hated it, of course, and though she couldn't confront me directly, I'd catch glimpses of her through my security feed, peeking from her upstairs window as groups walked by, her face a mix of resentment and disbelief. The real kicker, though, came when I learned that her property value had actually dropped because of my project. The appraisers noted that her backyard had limited access and privacy due to adjacent private conservation area, which in real estate speak meant you're not getting top dollar. I might have left it there. But fate handed me an even sweeter opportunity when the small vacant lot on the other side of her house went up for sale. The moment I saw the listing, I pounced, buying it outright and effectively surrounding her home on 3 sides with land I owned and controlled. This was my masterstroke. I connected both side parcels with matching fencing and gates, then landscaped the edges with dense hedges and wildflowers that doubled as habitat and visual barriers. By the time I was done, Karen's only view from her kitchen and living room windows was a wall of greenery punctuated by tall, locked gates she couldn't pass. It was a private paradise for me and my visitors, but for her it was a daily reminder of her failed crusade. She tried one last gambit, petitioning the HOA to pressure me into granting her an easement for community access, but the AOO board, tired of her antics and aware that I'd technically increased the neighborhood's appeal with my nature project, voted unanimously to reject her request. In fact, one board member privately thanked me for finally putting Karen in her place and hinted that more than a few neighbors were secretly enjoying her downfall. Over the next year, I barely heard from her directly, though my tour groups occasionally reported seeing her glaring from her porch or muttering under her breath as they passed. The tours became so popular that I eventually added a small seating area with informational plaques about the history of the land, complete with a laminated photo of the original broken fence and an explanation of how the conservation effort began. I didn't name Karen, of course, but anyone in the neighborhood knew exactly who had kicked off the chain of events, and that quiet public shaming was more effective than any argument or lawsuit could have been. By the time the second spring rolled around, Karen's yard looked unkempt, her once perfect flower beds overrun with weeds, and she seemed to spend more time indoors than out. I heard through the grapevine that she'd put the house on the market, but was getting lowball offers thanks to the unique lot configuration. Again, real estate code for boxed in. When she finally did sell, it was for far less than she'd hoped, and the day the moving truck pulled away, I walked out to the side gate, unlocked it, and took a slow stroll through my thriving green space, the air filled with birdsong and the scent of wildflowers. I thought about how a year earlier, this had all started with one smashed fence panel and a neighbor who thought she could bully her way through someone else's property, and how, instead of giving in or simply repairing the damage, I'd turned her arrogance into an opportunity, one that gave me more land, more privacy, a profitable side business, and the lasting satisfaction of knowing she'd left because she couldn't stand the walls she'd built around herself. As I locked the gate again, I realized that sometimes revenge isn't about a single dramatic payoff. Sometimes it's about building something so solid, so uncheckable, that the other person has no choice but to live with it, day after day, until they can't anymore. And that's exactly what I'd done.